welcome. Great to see so many of you here in this room. Great to see colleagues from around the world watching us on live stream. In addition to being the editor and publisher of the Columbia Journalism Review, I'm the co-founder of Covering Climate Now. So on behalf of Covering Climate Now, CJR, our colleagues at The Guardian, The Nation, and Solutions Journalism Network, I welcome you. Before we begin, the hosts of this conference collectively want to acknowledge that Manhattan is part of the ancestral and traditional homeland of the Lenni, Lenape, and Wappinger people. And indeed, continuing issues of exclusion, erasure, and systemic discrimination have so much to do with the important conversations we're here for today. So for a lot of us, this is a return, this meeting today. In 2019, some of us gathered in this very room for a conference about climate 4 years ago, and it would actually become the launch pad for what would become Covering Climate Now. And frankly, that meeting was born of frustration. We thought that the scale of the climate crisis was not being met with a scale of appropriate resources from journalism. And we thought that was a failure of journalism's mission. And we kept asking ourselves, like, are we doing justice to this story? And increasingly, the answer we came to was that we as a profession were not. Fast forward 4 years to today, we're in a different situation. Journalism, there is more coverage of climate. More newsrooms are focusing on what's happening around them. The scale of the climate emergency has grown in intensity and urgency, but yet that same question lingers. Are we doing enough? So what we're going to focus on today isn't so much what are people covering the climate emergency, it's how are we doing it? Are we making the connections between climate and every other story? Are we focused on the people who are most affected? Are we looking at solutions and learning from newsrooms that are doing it right? That's what we're here for today. We have a huge agenda. We're here to create blueprints to transform media in the coverage of climate. Day and a half, easy, easy. And we're gonna need all of you. So that really is a participatory, hands-on couple of days. You're gonna have a ton of opportunity to get involved. We're gonna hear from all of you. There are boards that you can contribute to. There's town halls that you can contribute to, but we wanna hear from you. We're also gonna hear from winners of the 2023 Covering Climate Now Journalism Awards, which were announced this week. You'll hear from some of those folks throughout the day. We'll take a moment at the end of the day to acknowledge them. We're at the Columbia Journalism School, so everything here is on the record. Please feel free to share your comments, observations, and thoughts on social media using the hashtag #ClimateChangesEverything. In addition, because we want this to be a space where everybody participates, we have some community agreements, which you'll see up here. I ask you to just take a look at those. Those are gonna help guide our interactions and discussions with each other over the next few days. So enough from me. It's my pleasure to introduce our MCs and esteemed colleagues who will be guiding us through the next day and a half. Stephanie Abrams has been with the Weather Channel since 2003. She is an on-camera meteorologist and co-host of America's Morning Headquarters. Zinhle Essamuah is co-anchor of the daytime news program NBC News Daily and a correspondent reporting across NBC's many news platforms, including NBC News Now, MSNBC, and Today. Thank you both for being here, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Kyle.
Yes, thank you. That was a great introduction.
We'll take it.
How's everybody doing?
Good.
Ready? We're gonna have a fun day. It's gonna be a good day.
It's gonna be a great day. We have so many different people in this room. We have reporters, we have editors, and we're all here to talk about climate because climate changes everything. And there's a key question we're focusing on today. How do we cover the story of climate change in a way that drives attention for our audiences and create impact. We do want to recognize some journalists who've already been making impact in this room. Representatives from 9 outlets who are all part of Solutions Journalism Network's Climate Beacons initiative. So I do ask, we're going to hype you up. Please stand as we acknowledge you. SJN's Climate Beacon newsrooms, in case you're unfamiliar, have really committed to transforming their coverage of climate in our country, focusing on community-informed, equity-based coverage journalism. So with us from all the way from California, we've got Capital and Maine, the Sacramento Bee, please stand. National outlets, Grist and the Sweaty Penguin. Nueve Millones, they're from Puerto Rico. Telemundo 51. Telemundo 51 from Miami. Omaha, Nebraska's The Reader. Yeah. The Washington Informer from DC. And WSHU Public Radio covering Connecticut and Long Island. Celebration's important, so if you all will stand together one more time and let's give you a rousing round of applause. Woo!
We'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge all the photojournalists that are in the room. We love our photojournalists, don't we? And those who, take all of this climate that we see that's happening around the world and see it through their lens and being able to really visualize it. It's really, really important for everyone. So with us today, we have Carolyn Beeler from The World. We'll do the same. We want everyone to stand up and applaud and welcome everyone warmly to the room here. Justin Cook, who is freelance. Also, Joanna Lauder with ABC in the house today. Erica Smith from the Los Angeles Times is here joining us. Lucas Thompson from NBC is here. And also Amy Westervelt of Critical Frequency. Thank you for coming today, everybody.
Truthfully, we kind of need to recognize everyone in this room for showing up, right? Because that's half the battle. I think we know that from this COVID era that we've been in. No matter where you are from, audiences everywhere, especially young audiences, are looking to their storytellers and their journalists to bring them the truth, and that includes on climate change. So we're really excited to talk about what it looks like to create and move forward the blueprint for reporting on climate change.
Yeah, it is, and I couldn't agree more. Of course, I'm really excited to be up here with you, Zinhle. So nice to meet you. It's the first time we met. We're already besties, so it's going to be a great day.
That's true.
And also, not everyone in this could make it in this room. We also have an overflow room, another auditorium, so we wanted to give a shout out to everyone who is there as well. Of course, as scientists on the front lines of this nation's most extreme weather events, something that me and my colleagues see and do at the Weather Channel, we really bear witness to the changing climate every single day. And I'm really honored to be among so many journalists here this week dedicated to this important topic and talking about it not only in the US, but also around the world. You've all seen the program. Well, hopefully you have. If not, you want to take a look at your program so you know what we have planned for the day. There are panels, there are workshops, and of course, a lot more. And over the course of the event, we aim to challenge colleagues in newsrooms around the world to tackle the climate story with more creativity and vigor. We want the creativity, the energy, the passion. We love seeing all of that. Also, exchanging ideas and strategies for covering important aspects of the climate story, highlighting justice and solutions as well, which are really the most important part of this. Plus, we're excited to welcome some very special guests. We'll have Christiana Figueres, who will be joining us, who is co-founder of the organization Global Optimism and former Executive Secretary for the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and from the White House. Also, Ali Zaidi will be here tomorrow. That's exciting to see him. Of course, he serves as the National Climate Advisor and Assistant to President Biden. As we were just told, of course, everything here is on the record over the next day and a half. So you're welcome to file stories, share your thoughts on social media, or however you choose.
Yeah, we want to see it. Tweet about it, write about it. It's important, but we also want you to participate, right? We're not just going to be talking at you. We want to hear from you. If you look around, you've probably seen some of those flip charts around the room. There's already some notes on them. If there's an idea that resonates with you, write it down. You can add your name to the comments, and you can also leave them anonymously. Your comments are going to help inform the subjects we talk about. So while we do have an agenda, it really is shaped by you too, so we want you in the weeds with us. Of course, we've also built in ample time for audience Q&A throughout the panel, so pay attention, because we might call on you. We won't really call on you, but we'll have a microphone going around should you wish to speak. And of course, during the networking breaks and lunch, we hope you'll get to know each other, right? Turn to your neighbor. Actually, maybe we pause and turn to your neighbor.
And say hey.
Say hey, neighbor.
Just like we did earlier today.
Let's take a pause. Turn to your neighbor if you haven't already.
Hey, neighbor.
Get to know her name. I love it.
We're even getting hugs already in the audience.
So this is meant to just give you a taste of what it can be like to get to know the great people in this room. I know, I hate to cut off a good time. I see some people looking at me sideways, saying I'm cutting off the conversations, but the conversation really will continue throughout the day. So make sure, beyond a passing hello, you switch contact information and get to know each other.
So we want to get right into it and get started here with our first panel, which will explore where climate journalism has been, the climate changes we face ahead, and also some ways we might transform coverage. Our moderator from Covering Climate Now, who is the co-founder and also executive director, Mark Hersgaard, will get us started. Mark. Yes, enjoy.
Hey y'all, how y'all doing? How about some energy in the room? If I stand over here, I think you can see me a little better with the light, yeah? Nod your heads if you hear me. Okay, there we go. I want to open up my computer here, and I'll just say, as the co-founder of Covering Climate Now, thank you all for being here today. Thank you for everything you have done. Thank you for everything you will be doing. And we have a lot of faith in you, in what you will be doing, what all of us will be doing together. And we're going to hold you to that. So let me just say to all of my colleagues as journalists, near and far, it is such an honor to be speaking with you here today, and to be, in a moment, sharing the stage with, I have to say, a collection of rock star climate journalists. I'm looking down at two of them right now. We're all talking about how newsrooms everywhere on Earth can lift our coverage of the climate story to a higher level, to the level that is really demanded by this crisis that is crashing all around us. But first, I want to give a special shout out, and I'm going to speak directly to that camera up there. I want to give a special shout out to our colleagues overseas around the world who are joining us via video. Many of you are in Africa and Asia, and many of you are working to report the climate story under very difficult conditions. You may face police harassment, government harassment, or worse. Almost certainly you do not have the newsroom resources that you need. To each one of you, I want to say, we at this conference stand with you. You and your colleagues are part of the global community of journalists that we are trying to build. And we want to work with you. We want to learn from you. We want to help you if and when we can. And we hope that you will stand with us, because all of us, as journalists, are going to need as many allies as we can get if we are going to do what this historic moment on the Earth calls us to do as journalists. So I just hope that all of us can keep that spirit in mind, that we are so lucky to be journalists. You know, we're so lucky to have this role, but with that luck comes responsibilities, and that's what we're going to be talking about in the next day and a half. The organization I represent, Covering Climate Now, we believe that more and better news coverage is itself an essential climate solution. Kyle Pope mentioned that 4 years ago in this room is when we launched Covering Climate Now. In his keynote speech that day, the legendary TV journalist Bill Moyers asked whether we as journalists can, quote, can we tell the climate story so people get it? Can we tell it so people get it? As journalists, we're paid by our employers, if we're lucky. Again, some of us are not paid so much by our employers. But we work for the public. We're paid by our employers, but we work for the public. And unless the general public, and not just in the global north, but all around the world, understands that this planet is on fire, understands why it is on fire, and understands that we can fix this, really that they can fix this, that our audiences can fix this, that fire can be put out. Unless we help the public awaken to that knowledge, there will simply not be strong enough public pressure on governments and businesses around the world to do what science demands to preserve a livable planet for our kids. I speak as the father of an 18-year-old. I'm sure many of you have children as well. And that's really what this is about. So our goal 4 years ago in this room, as Kyle said, was to break the climate silence that pervaded so much of the mainstream media, especially in the United States, but not only. That silence has now been broken, partly because of the work that all of you have done. And some news outlets are really doing great coverage. We're going to talk about that in the next day and a half. But the media as a whole is still way too climate quiet. Scientists have been screaming for years that humanity faces nothing less than a climate emergency. Emergency, not just a problem, not just a crisis, an emergency. Many of our colleagues in more traditional news outlets shy away from saying emergency. They think that's activist. They need to understand that long before Greta Thunberg was calling it an emergency, scientists were calling it an emergency. There are thousands of them writing in peer-reviewed articles literally saying this is an emergency. Now, the good news for us as journalists is that we know how to cover emergencies. We cover them a lot. We're not perfect, but we basically know the drill. We saw that during COVID, right? We played COVID big because we recognized it was an emergency, because the scientists told us this was an emergency. It was killing people all over the world. And by the way, climate change is killing people all over the world today. It's just not written on their death certificates. And we need to get that point across to people. So during COVID, look at how we covered it. We played it big. Most news outlets everywhere in the world, I don't care how poor you were, you ran 2 or 3 COVID stories every day. And as a result, even very casual news consumers recognize something big is going on. I better pay attention. A second thing that we did, we talked about solutions. We need to be doing this on climate as well. We talked about what the people in our audiences could do to deal with the COVID emergency. You can wear a mask, which I have in my pocket. You can socially distance. You can get vaccinated. We saw that as part of our proper news coverage. Our audiences desperately need the equivalent information on climate change today. They need to know that humanity can still avoid the worst if we take strong action. Damien Carrington, who was supposed to be on today's panel, British Airways suddenly canceled his flight last night. So to his great regret, he won't be here. We have an excellent substitute for him in Ben Tracy at CBS News. But Damien has done some of the best writing on this. And he found a graph in the latest IPCC report that I think all the rest of us as journalists overlooked. And it basically says, you know, we can still keep the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. We have all the technologies. What's lacking, Damien wrote, is, quote, a resource heavily lacking so far the political will to push aside vested interests and radically pursue the policies that will work. But that political will that's lacking, that is something our audiences can do something about. And we need to let them know that. They can do it by voting, they can do it by speaking out, they can do it by not buying sustainable projects. Above all, they can do it by talking to other people, their family, their friends. Scientists say that's the most effective thing that people can do. Who talks to more people than anyone else on this planet? The media. Again, our responsibility is to do this. Now, our colleagues, I'm looking at her right now, from the Solutions Journalism Network, have taught us that it is essential to include solutions in our coverage. And this is not activism. This is not advocacy. This is telling the whole story. The problem, yes, but also the solutions. So that's where we need to go. And the solutions include justice. I see that, so you can put it down. I'll just say, as someone who's been privileged to report from 25 countries around the world, in Africa and Asia and South America, there is no climate solution without justice. Not at the international level, not at the local level. That, again, is just telling the whole story. That's what we're going to be talking about in the next day and a half, and I could not be more thrilled and frankly honored to invite now up to the stage to join me the panelists that we're going to talk about all this with. And I'm going to introduce them in alphabetical order. First, my dear esteemed colleague who flew in overnight from Paris to be with us, Sophie Huet. She is the global editor-in-chief of Agence France-Presse, the global news agency. Please come on up. Hello. And second, my equally esteemed colleague, Lagipoiva Cherelle Jackson. She is the climate collaborations editor, on the global climate desk at the AP, the Associated Press. Now, a new colleague of mine, Omaya Sosa Pascual. She is the co-founder and special projects editor at Puerto Rico's Center for Investigative Journalism. Maya, come on up. And last but not least, Ben Tracy. He is the Climate and Environment National Correspondent for CBS News. Come on up, Ben. I think you're allowed to sit.
Thank you.
Okay, and everybody's mics are on and working?
I think
Let's
so.
try. Is that okay?
Hello?
Okay.
Yes.
And I'm just going to remind you all that this is a participatory conference. I'm going to ask each one of my colleagues here 2 questions each. They're going to answer, and then the rest of the session is going to be you. The rest of the session is going to be you, and so please be thinking about your questions, and don't hesitate to be using these flip charts in the back as well. So, Sophie, I'm going to start with you. And because we're in the United States, I'm just going to say that I think that the AFP news agency is not as well known in the U.S. as it deserves to be. AFP is a massive global news organization. They have 1,700 journalists stationed around the world. They provide content 24/7 in 6 different languages to hundreds of newsrooms around the world that reach literally billions of people. And over the last 4 years, AFP has transformed its entire news organization to prioritize climate. In fact, your daily climate news feed, correct me if I'm wrong on this, offers client newsrooms 8 to 10 different stories on the average day on climate.
Would say even more.
Even more.
Depends on the news, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, how did you do it?
Thank you. I just want to make clear that what I'm going to tell you about is just an ongoing effort, and it's not something that we haven't reached all our goals yet, but yeah, we're still working on it. So the first thing was that the decision to make it a priority, an editorial priority, came from the top management 4 years ago. And we decided to call it the future of the planet, because to make clear that it was touching everything and everyone in the newsroom. So it relies on 5 pillars. The first one was a reorganization in our headquarters in Paris, where we decided to put together the people who were working on climate and environment and the people who were working on the economics and mostly the biggest fuel emitters such as industry, energy, agriculture, and they are now working together in the same planet hub, I would call it. And this is just to cover the ongoing industrial revolution. And it seemed to us very important to do that. The second pillar is our global network. So we have reporters in text, photo, videos worldwide, and it's really extremely powerful to cover the climate change on the ground. And we also have in Washington and Bangkok an expertise to work with the people at the headquarters to be able to tell about the people, to teach, I would say, the newsroom about what could be said or not in their stories. And the third pillar is that this reporting has to be on the ground, it has to be visual, and it has to be human. So this is really something very, very important to us. And so we are also putting specific resources on special reports, special multimedia reports, for example, in Amazonia, in Iraq, or recently we've been to Greenland. And the fourth pillar is strong, practical guidelines for the whole newsroom to help people context their stories, connect the dots with the correct attribution. And the fifth pillar is training, obviously. It's very important to train the newsroom, so on what is climate change, and the facts and figures, but also on greenwashing. It's extremely important as we have now a flood of announcements about net zero, neutral carbon, etc. And so it's very important that our reporters are able to detect when it is greenwashing. And just last thing, I would add, we're lucky, so how we have a big newsroom, there is an internal mobility within our newsroom globally. And it's very also helpful to spread the knowledge. And just an example is that our UN correspondent now has been on the climate beat before. So when she arrived at the UN last year, she was maybe the first to write a story about the High Sea Treaty. And it had a huge success, actually. So that's, yes, more or less what we are trying to do.
Just that, huh? So the question I have to ask then, as impressive as that is, I mean, you're basically talking about making climate a story for every beat in the news organization. Is that something that applies and that is possible for also smaller news organizations who do not have the reach, who do not have the resources of AFP? If you could just reflect on what lessons apply and don't for others.
So I think what we could all do is just, I mean, we are covering breaking news. This is our DNA, and I think most of the news organizations are doing that. And we know that disasters, and so climate-related disaster, have a huge impact on the audience. So each time there is such a story, we can connect the dots. And this is very, I mean, it's really a very strong opportunity to explain why this is happening, why we had these floods in Libya. Etc. So this is, I think, it can apply to everyone. The thing is that maybe you have to think about having some kind of guidelines just to help the newsroom do that on a daily basis. But it is extremely important to connect the dots on a daily basis in every story. And also on I mean, corporate and financial announcements, just, okay, we have the financial results, but what's going on about the carbon emission pledge, etc. So this is something that is important just to implement that on a daily basis. The second thing is that I think we see that there is a huge success on stories that are telling about the people's lives. So the fuel, energy, food prices, for example, they play very well. And so this is also something you can connect with climate change on many opportunities. Explainers obviously work very well, so just it's a matter of format. Also, how do we explain what's going on? So the visual human aspect is something that everyone can do, and the visual impact on climate change is I mean, it's really driving the the audience on our stories. Training, guidelines, but this is something, I mean, we've been discussing within Covering Climate now. This is also something that can be provided externally. Actually, we are providing a fact-checking on climate module that is available online for everyone. So this is, I mean, there are many resources available. And I would, I mean, also add that that's what you said, we also maybe have to provide a sense of hope. And this is maybe with solutions, but this is what people also expect is, what can we do at our individual and collective level? So, yeah.
Let me point out that what she mentions, there is a lot of training available from Solutions Journalism Network, from AFP. You can find it all on our website at Covering Climate Now, Solutions Journalism Network. If you are from a smaller newsroom, there is a lot of resources free and available to you that can boost your coverage. Let me turn now to you, Cherelle. You're the head of collaborations at the Associated Press, so I want to ask how your approach compares to AFP's, but I want to begin first with the fact that you come from the Pacific and from a small island state, if I'm not mistaken. I would imagine that background has really shaped how you as a journalist, as a person, come to the climate story. Can you talk about how that shapes your journalism and what others who do not have that background might learn from that?
Thank you, Mark. Can you hear me okay? I'm very soft-spoken, or I'd like to think so. I echo the sentiments of Kyle and recognize the traditional owners of this land. I speak for and I am here due to the strength and might of my Polynesian ancestors. So I say therefore, talofa, talofa, talofalaba. My challenge to you is to make sure that my flower stays in my hair. So when you see it fall slightly, just raise your hand and say the flower is coming down. This is a small island challenge, that you, journalists in the Pacific, women journalists have to deal with this challenge being on camera. Just make sure the flower stays up. Now, to your question, Mark, thank you so much. And in my culture, we acknowledge those who brought us here. Thank you to CCE now for inviting me. Thank you for recognizing small island developing states. 4 years ago, I approached you as part of my role as editor for Pacific Environment Weekly, a small website that I founded to ensure that Pacific Island journalists tell the stories of climate change on the front lines. And CCE now answered. And for me as a small island journalist at the time, I was like, wow, so you actually care. And so that was lovely because often we reach out to global organizations from small island states and they do not care. And it's usually lip service. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity. And I'm grateful for the fact that it is truly inclusive in nature, the work that you do. So you ask how my upbringing and my background as a journalist in a small island developing state impacts the work I'm doing now. For some context, I worked in Samoa as Americans pronounce it. It's tiring. Exhausting, in fact. Someone asks you, where are you from? I say, Samoa. This is their answer. Oh, San Juan. No. It's an island in the Pacific. And they're like, oh, okay, Somalia. No. So I say Samoa. It's a small island developing state in the heart of Polynesia. We have a language, we're a sovereign nation, we have money, and we have very big men who are high chiefs who wear skirts. Currently, we have a woman prime minister, praise be. So, besides the question, I started working as a journalist when I was 19, so that's 20 years of covering climate change in the Pacific Islands on the front lines. Cyclones, floods, droughts, you name it, I've covered it in my native language and with my colleagues in Samoa. Only 3 years ago, I moved to the United States, and only 3 years ago, I worked in management in a mainstream media organization in the US. I take that back. I only celebrated my 1-year anniversary at AP just a week ago. So let's clap for AP for the foresight of hiring an islander to manage collaborations. AP started the Global Climate Desk in February of last year but climate change and science and environmental issues was covered by the Associated Press way before that, as you may all know. The collaborations editor role is to ensure that we partner with small and large news organizations to lift the voices of minority groups of journalists in the Global South, but also to build and strengthen the coverage of climate change in a considerate and inclusive manner by local journalists, for local audiences and global audiences. So it's a privilege for me to bring my Global South lenses, my Islander lenses, to this role, because I see challenges that my American colleagues may not necessarily see. And it's been, it's been an absolute eye-opening experience to see how the global North perceive the issues of the Global South and how we can make that shift with the right people in the right places at the decision-making level in the newsroom.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, then there are a lot of opportunities for other news organizations to be collaborating with you, news organizations from the Global South, from the Global North, et cetera. Could you give us a sense of some of the ones that you've worked with and talk in quite concrete terms about, folks here or joining us overseas, if they wanted to reach out to you to propose a collaboration, how would they go about doing that?
Sure. Thank you. I love that Mark just gives me the talking points. Mark, you're awesome. And when you say quick and brief, in the Pacific Islands, that means about 30 minutes, because we acknowledge the land, the sea, and the sky.
We've got you budgeted for 45 minutes, actually.
Okay, so we are open to all collaborations that are meaningful, and especially those that include the Global South and issues of minority groups. So one of the most amazing collaborations we've had so far is with the Press-Presse of India, or PTI. With that collaboration, which was funded kindly and also supported by the Stanley Center for Democracy and Peace and Security, we flew 7 editors and senior journalists to Kochi in India at the request of the Press-Presse of India to work with their local journalists to train them on the ground, on assignment, on how to report on climate change.
Sorry, you mean 7 AP editors?
Yes.
Were flown to India?
Yes, at the request. So what's important here is that with collaborations, you have to be responsive to the needs of the newsroom. Having been a stringer and a fixer on a small island for 20 years, there is nothing that hurts the soul more than being instructed to do a certain thing by a Global North editor. So with this one, the first question is, what do you need in terms of global climate coverage? PTI was like, we don't have a climate desk, we don't have climate journalists. We have every other type of beat, but not that. We need help. And so we said, okay, great. Let me identify some senior Indian climate journalists who can come and train you and do a South-South cooperation. No, we want the AP editors and senior journalists to come train us. So as opposed to an approach where you go in thinking, okay, it's better we have the South-South cooperation. But in fact, they requested for us to come in. And what resulted was that you would have Seth Borenstein, AP senior science writer, partnered with a 2-year cadet journalist at PTI. And this young journalist wrote some amazing stories as a part of that partnership. She pitched the story, and Seth was just there to support her in writing that story. So it was quite an amazing partnership. So in order to partner with me, you can email me, you can come with AP, you can come and meet me, and we can discuss a partnership. And these partnerships can be a series of stories that are co-published with AP. And that's a key factor of the collaborations, is that when we partner with a local news organizations or a small group of journalists, we co-publish the story. So you have then a journalist, for instance, with the PTI, you have an Indian journalist who's only ever been featured in local media, now have an AP byline. That is a career-changing byline for that journalist. And I'm so proud that's something that AP is now pursuing. That was brief, right?
Very brief. Did I not tell you these were rock stars? So we're halfway through, and now the third rock star. Omaya, you are a veteran journalist and, like myself, an investigative journalist. Puerto Rico, we know, has been on the front lines, tragically, of the climate emergency, especially in recent years. And I'd just like you to speak a little bit about your experience and how it compares with what Cherelle has just been telling us about the perspective of being, I don't even know whether to say it. It's a global, I mean, Puerto Rico has more population than 20 states in the United States, and yet so many people in the global north, or at least here in the US, still look at you as like, who is Puerto Rico? What?
We're a colony. We're a colony. We're a small island. We have all the problems in the world. So, you know, we are beyond the emergency. We live with it every day, actually. So, we would love to wait for wealthy and developed nations to make the changes they've been talking about for decades. Well, we can't do that. We live with this. We after Hurricane Maria, we have power outages almost every other day. So we're in adaptation mode, and as journalists, we have to work, and we are also victims at the same time of the emergency. So I know we don't have time for this, but Hurricane Maria was really eye-opening for us. All of a sudden, we were left with nothing, and we had to do journalism with no cell phones, no internet, no nothing, no fuel, no supermarkets, nothing. So we learned the hard way. We have to prepare for this. We changed our newsroom dynamics. We even changed our headquarters. We became, I'm never going to use the resilient word because that's you know, a horrible word. The word that's like excusing the negligence of our government and of wealthy nations too. But we basically have to prepare for survival, for our survival, family survival, but also to inform our public. So we changed many things, as I said, and I'm listening to Cherelle, and we have exactly the same experience. There's a lot to, let's say, be done by the big news outlets, and we actually, I have good news for small newsrooms. We made a big difference, and we keep on making a big difference by changing the dynamics forcibly. With Hurricane Maria, we set up our own database because there was no data. I don't know if you know about the death count and how we revealed that. That was basically done by hand with
the true death count.
Yes, the truth. That started with a notebook and 2 reporters on the ground just, you know, writing down notes, journalism 101. And when this happens, that has to be done, right? So, but we were able to do great partnerships, just, you know, fighting the hard fight with the huge news outlets. They all come like, I call it parachute journalism. They just go to the place where the disaster is, and they all want the hot story, the sexy story. They don't really care too much about what's going on the ground. There's not respect for the local knowledge and the local journalists. So they get it actually wrong many times. I've seen huge mistakes in some of the biggest news outlets in the States and other places. So you can start by, you know, recognizing that the people that live there are the ones who know best what's going on. And we had some of the biggest news outlets come reach out to us to get our data after we were months working on our data, our manual database. And we actually were able only to negotiate with AP. I don't know if you know that. That was one of the best partnerships we've done because we needed help after a while, right? So, but I think the collaborations division didn't exist by then.
No,
it was the goodwill of a journalist called Mike Weisenstein. So, I mean, maybe he's listening at some point. He was the Havana chief. And he said, well, first we started with quartz.com.
Yes.
They reached out to us. It was a Mexican journalist with a Chinese data journalist, and there was a team of 4. This ended up with a collaboration of 30 persons all over the region because AP said, okay, we will let you lead this collaboration. We're like, you don't have any other choice if you want my data, right? So, but it was a hard fight, and we learned the hard way after very bad experiences with big outlets that did whatever they wanted, said one thing and did another. So now we have like a contract, an agreement, and we're a very small outlet. And as I said, you know, many, many good stories can be done. And right now, I think we do about 10 collaborations with big outlets all over the world. every year.
So we're quickly running out of time. Let me just ask a quick follow-up and a quick answer. Obviously, you're collaborating with the AP, but specifically, what are the other news organizations outside of Puerto Rico that you would like to collaborate with, or just in general, what would you need? How could we stand in solidarity with you as journalists who are outside of Puerto Rico?
Well, first I'll add that we have to go beyond the emergency news story. That's really important because everything is affected, like societies are being destroyed, healthcare systems, islands, the very existence of islands are the most affected ones and the least recognized. The story, we have to hold accountable developed and wealthy nations, even if it's not a sexy story. You have to go on the ground and find the story. What can you do? I'm sorry the Guardian's not here. They should be collaborating with us, and we never get around that. We have put together a Caribbean investigative journalist group. So we have journalists in about 25 islands, colonies, and island states in the region that speak French, Spanish, English. It's a mess, but that's where the story is. We're the most vulnerable countries, and some of these colonies, I was just talking to Sophie, we're gonna start collaborating from here. That's gonna go on because we have journalists from Guadeloupe. The story's not getting out to France. That's where it has to go. So action is.
So the Guardian will be here later today, and I pledge to you we will put you together. And I can't speak for the Guardian, but that's the kind of these are the kind of collaborations that we're talking about, and the success stories. So thank you, Ben Tracy, CBS News, the one TV person we have up here on stage. For those of you who are under 40, you may find it surprising that television is still globally the leading source of news for most people. Social media is catching up rapidly. That will change in the coming years, but still TV is a big, big voice. And here in this country, TV is especially what middle America watches. So very glad to have you here, Ben.
Thank you.
And CBS has really pushed in recent years to increase its climate coverage, in part by naming you as a national correspondent. Tell us basically, how did that happen? And what can others learn from your experience at CBS, both good and not good and bad, but in terms of the obstacles and the achievements?
Sure. Thank you for the question. I was a White House correspondent at the time. I had covered the last 2 years of the Trump administration. And when the election came around, my bosses said, what are you thinking you want to do after the election, depending on how things turn out? And I said, regardless of how things turn out, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm good. 2 years was enough.
True.
And so I had said, I'm really passionate about climate, the environment. I don't think we're covering this enough because there's no one who's really responsible for covering it. Certainly, a lot of my colleagues had done amazing work in the space, but there was no one really charged with this as a beat. And to their great credit, they said, okay, let's do it. And it's in the beginning, it's my producer, Chris Spinder, who is here today, just the two of us kind of trying to figure this out along the way. And I would say 3 years into this, every year it gets easier for us to get stories approved. It gets easier for them to, when we come to them with what might seem like a crazy idea, like we want to go do a story about how carbon offsets are BS. And they'll look
and they're like, what are carbon offsets?
They'll look at the pitch and read this and say, this is an excellent newspaper story. Maybe you should work for a newspaper. And we'll say, no, there's a visual way we can go tell this. And to his credit, Chris always figures out these really visual ways to bring these stories to life, because on the TV side, the real challenge is it needs to be visual, and the time constraints are insane. On the evening news, you might get 1:30 to tell your story. If you get 2 minutes, that's a long piece. Al Ortiz is here, who ran the evening news for a while, and he knows how this goes, the struggle every day to fill. You only have 22 minutes, I think, is how much time they have to actually program the show. So we're always kind of coming up against those barriers, but we're trying to find ways to bring these visual human stories to life.
So I'm going to ask Ben one more quick question, but I'm going to ask all of you who do have questions. There's mics that are going to be, not quite sure why this is feeding back. There's mics that are going to be walking around, so if you do wish to ask a question, please raise your hand and they will find you. Ben, one more quick thing about visuals, because as you say, TV, it has to be visual. What are the lessons that, and Sophie, you said this too, that what really impacts the audience is when you put the information visually. That's what really has an effect. So thinking back to during COVID, Are there any lessons from how TV covered COVID that apply to how TV could cover climate?
Yeah, and I think one of the things you also said is this importance of the human element of this, telling these stories. So what we always try to do, especially if it's a complicated story, for instance, we had a piece that ran yesterday morning on our morning show that was 4 minutes on insurance and how the climate crisis is impacting insurance rates around the country. That's not a real morning show broadcast network story you would normally see. So when we start a piece like that, we always say, who are we going to tell this through? Who is the person that is the example of this problem? So we found a woman who lives up in the mountains outside of Los Angeles. We found another couple that lives in Key West and kind of told the story through them, what their personal experience is. So that's a way we try to bring it to life and also show people that these are things that are really impacting people now. It's not just when the hurricane comes or when the wildfire hits or the heat wave. So I'm grateful that we've been able to tell some of these complicated stories. And I'm finding as time goes on, you know, in our news organization, which is very large, we often don't even know what another team is working on. They might be doing a climate piece in Europe that we're not even aware of until it airs. So one of the things that I've been trying to do internally is spread the word about how we can make the climate connection in all these stories we're covering. So when it was all the heat waves this summer, it was just sending out like, here's the one sentence you could add to this piece, because we know time is of the essence, that makes this connection. Or when the tropical storm was heading up towards Los Angeles, it was more of a, let's not say this is driven by climate change. This is a very complicated series of events that is happening. Here's where one connection might be, but don't over-prescribe it.
So those of you who may be wishing for that kind of copy, the scientifically vetted, here's 12 words that you can put into your script or into your news story that make the climate connection. We have that on the website at Covering Climate Now. I urge you to take a look at it. You know, when you're on deadline and you're trying to get a story on the air and your executive producers or your senior producer suddenly says, well, can we really say this? Here's 12 words, scientifically bulletproof, that you can put right in there. So I'm looking back here. Are there questions from the audience? And where there are, I'm going to ask Anna to come forward. Here's a question in the front.
Thank you. Oh, okay. Good morning. Thank you for being here. I want to say that I'm just loving the beautiful, interesting accents that we're hearing here. I'm talking to the women right now.
You don't like my Minnesotan accent?
I love beautiful and unusual accents, and I really enjoy them. And I think you all should be wearing the flower, every one of you.
This is what I am saying.
Yeah, yeah. My name is Mary Lowe. I'm a reporter for a environmental news website in Rhode Island. We are a state, not an island. We are not Long Island. At present, I'm writing about offshore wind. Big deal in New England, very controversial. My question, and I'm really looking for very useful advice here, is I often feel like our stories are just preaching to the choir. And I hope you know what I mean by that. They're being read by people who already agree with us, our point of view. In the case of offshore wind, our point of view is pro-offshore wind. Anyway, I feel like we're preaching to the choir, and there are readers or potential readers who may either be neutral or disagree with our point of view, and I don't feel like, we might not be reaching them. They're not reading, they don't believe it, they don't care, they've made up their mind.
Okay.
So, how can you help?
So, Sophie, I'd like to ask you to turn to that question first. Anybody else can offer their thoughts.
Thank you. Yeah, it's fairly difficult. I mean, as we have a global audience, we're not having this kind of issue as trying to address a specific audience, but there are some stuff that can be, I think, helpful. The main one is how it affects people in their daily lives, and how you can just tell it in a human way. So that's what we are trying to do. And so to do so, you have to go and see people, make it visual, asking people, in videos, for example. So, for example, we had an exclusive story two years ago about an IPCC report. So we said that's great. It's an exclusive, but we are not gonna. It's a report. So what can we do with that? And so we just figured out that we could. In this report there was the issue of the coastal cities addressed. So we went worldwide in several coastal cities to see the impacts of climate change on these cities. And so we created this report, which was awarded by Clover and Climate Now, actually. And it made the story much more easy to understand, and it put it at an individual level. You could feel, okay, if they're feeling that in Florida, if they feel that in Asia, etc., it can happen to me if I'm living in a coastal city. So I think this is the way you can address that. And there's another way, which is also, so you talked about data journalism. You can, on some stories, rely also on very good data sets where you can have a very small granularity on what's going on at a very local level. And it can be very interesting also to address very specific local audience so people can understand what's the impact on their lives.
We did a couple stories on offshore wind, so I just want to give you one quick idea. We've done the overview stories, but the most recent story we did, we actually told it through a shipyard in Louisiana that is building a servicing ship for the offshore wind industry. And this is a shipyard that was down on its luck, almost going out of business because the oil and gas industry is drying up down there. So this is offshore wind has completely revitalized these shipyards in southeast Louisiana. And so we told it through a jobs lens and not just a lens of here's the things they're building off the coast of Rhode Island.
Fascinating. So please be raising your hand so that the microphone runners on the sides can see you. And Karen, I'm going to call on you. One more quick note on this. One of the things we've learned at Covering Climate Now, to answer your question, ma'am, is don't necessarily, if you're worried about only preaching to the choir, don't necessarily do what is the instinctive reaction of a newsroom when you think, oh, we need to cover this more, which is say, let's start a new program or let's start a new magazine. We need to reach people where they are. So later this afternoon, you're going to hear about from how France Television has done that by changing how they report their weather cast, which people already watch, to make it instead a climate weather cast. Over here, please.
Hey, how are you all doing? Charles Ellison, hey, good to see you, Mark. See you in person, actually.
Amen.
2023 Emerson Collective Fellow, also with the bnote.com. Just two-part, one, a real quick comment just to follow up on what she was saying and then a question. But literacy obviously has a lot to do with that. I don't know what your internal planning conversations are like about that. We have a situation like here in the US, right, where 54% of American adults can't read beyond a 6th to 8th grade level. So how do we make that, that's a big question for everyone in this room, how do we make those climate conversations less esoteric, right, less scientific? The real quick question here, the conversations of the reporting on policymakers, right? So I talk with, report on a lot of policymakers at the state legislative level. I notice with climate reporting, we tend to go for the high profile policymakers like the president, members of Congress. The real grunt work's being done at the state level. So one, are you covering those policymakers who are less high in profile, but doing a lot of the work, right? And two, are you covering the policymakers in such a way where you're not just getting a response from them, right? You're also making sure that whatever they're doing legislatively has impact. So I'm just wondering about what the policymaker plan.
Holding them accountable. There is one of our partners is Capital in Maine. I'm looking at Danny Feingold in the back right now. They do very state-oriented reporting on exactly what you're raising, Charles. Omaya, could you talk a little bit to that, please?
Yeah, sure. They are the ones responsible for the emergency response plans and the recovery plans. We found out, again, the hard way that's very important, and that wasn't in place. I recommend getting to know this beforehand, before the disaster strikes. What are your emergency response plans? Are they updated? Do they exist? Do people know them? What happens afterwards? Also, and it goes to your question too, we've done a lot with the mortality database and the local agencies. the intersections with health, with economy, for example, with economy, socioeconomic class, and so forth, identifying the areas that are most vulnerable and most affected. Health speaks to people, death speaks to people. So if you go to the mortality databases of your state or for your region, you can see what impact it's actually happening, and you go and locate the actual victims and speak to them. So I'm not sure if it answers your question, but locally, they're the most immediate responsibles when the emergency strikes.
I think we have time for one more. I'm going to ask over here. Yes, go ahead, please.
Sure. Hi, my name is Danielle Renwick. I'm the editor of Nexus Media News. We're a small nonprofit climate outlet that syndicates our stories with bigger outlets like The Guardian, like The Nation. And I'm always asking myself, how can a small newsroom on a limited budget really make a meaningful contribution to the broader climate space? How can we punch above our weight?
How can the small outlets punch above their weight? I see you smiling. Go ahead.
First of all, I love the work that Nexus does. How can you do that? You work with the larger newsrooms. You're already doing that. But be very strategic about your approach so that you continue to keep the maintain the integrity of the way that you cover. What we're finding in the AP from the Global Climate Desk is that the way and the nuanced approaches that smaller newsroom, the way they cover climate change is the way we would like to pursue the climate story, because AP and larger newsrooms and news agencies have covered climate like in the way that our friend here has mentioned, that it's the big story. It's responsive to the great leaders talking about climate change. But really the real stories come from the ground up and are told by the local journalists in those small towns, in those small islands, and in the communities that those journalists are used to covering. So you actually have a very valuable voice, and as small newsrooms, you can offer a lot to larger newsrooms and news agencies. So sky is the limit. You know where to find me. That's one of the steps that you can take.
And I would say that Covering Climate Now also helps with those kinds of collaborations. And all of you here, you're here in this room together. You can create these networks as well. So again, reach out to one another. I think we do have time for one more because my colleagues have been so admirably concise. There we go.
Yes, I promise to be concise. Peace and blessings. This question is for the reporters who cover the Global South in particular. What's the strategy as far as indicting the Global North and really bringing light to the legacy of colonialism that persists in multinational corporations siphoning resources that cause, climate change, this whole process? How do we rise above current events and piecemeal events to paint a bigger picture about how this has been going on for hundreds of years?
Oh my God, what a question. I wish I had an answer for you.
3 minutes left.
I'm here. That's one of the reasons I'm here, and I hopped on the plane. It's very difficult. We need to get the large outlets to really put that story in their priorities. It's never there. The journalists of the big outlets in the States and in Europe never ever ask this question. I mean, maybe sometimes, but no, they're not. It's not a sexy story, I think, to hold your own government accountable for what they're doing to poor nations and small nations. Is that a sexy story here? I don't think so. I don't know. But it needs to happen because it's a global story. And, people are dying. And what are we going to do? I don't know. If you have an idea, reach out to me.
Sophie, I'm going to put you on the spot here. You have one of the biggest news organizations on earth. How do you answer that question?
Yeah, I think it really has to deal with another topic we are trying to address, and it's not easy. It's to put diversity in our newsroom. So we, as we are an international news organization, we have people from more than 80 nationalities within our newsroom globally, but we also have to improve diversity each continent, in our newsroom, at the headquarters, everywhere. So this is how we're going to probably try to improve that, even though we are trying on a daily basis also to address that issue. But it really has a lot to do with the diversity in our newsroom, just to put that issue on the first.
The first rank. Diversity in the newsroom. Please do.
Our strategy right now for the past years is fighting big fights all the time with the big outlets. I mean, we're all the time just punching with them. The story, this is the story, that's not the story. You know, you get tired, but yeah, that's
If
our
I-
strategy
if I
right
can
now,
add-
just fighting.
Sorry, if I can add, Mark, I think there's always that temptation for Global South journalists to be advocates. But really, the responsibility of a Global South journalist is to rise in the newsroom to a decision-making level that you can then influence coverage in a way that is inclusive and of voices of those in the Global South and the issues. It's not always about colonialism in the Global South. It is very much about what are we suffering and going through. So we're proud at the AP of the 9 editors we have at the Global Climate Desk. Most of them are not from the US. There's only 2 American editors. So that diversity, I agree with Sophie, that diversity in the newsroom lends itself to inclusive reporting and to raising those issues that are not normally covered by the mainstream media. Thank you.
And we will have an opportunity as a profession with COP28 to deal with that very question of colonialism and big powers. COP28 being run by an oil company head. So that is a theme that I hope all of us will be bringing to the fore. As I said earlier, there is no climate solution without climate justice. We're going to close there. I just want to thank each of you. I think we've all learned so much from what you've said. You've brought us your heads, you've brought us your hearts. Sophie, Cherelle, Omaya, Ben, I'm in your debt. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back.